Euronews Now. It's Tuesday, April 19. These are your top stories. A new phase of war. Russian forces launch a new offensive in the east of Ukraine after retreating from the capital region and other parts of the country. Kiev has vowed its forces will never give up. A busy day for US President Joe Biden. He will be addressing G7, EU and NATO leaders as the battle for Donbass begins. And UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson will face Parliament as it returns from Easter recess. He's expected to make a grovelling apology after he was fined for attending a party during lockdown.
Russia has launched a highly anticipated offensive along the entire front line in southern and eastern Ukraine in an attempt to secure the Donbass region. Their defense ministry has announced the destruction of a number of Ukrainian military facilities. A Ukraine military spokesperson says Russian forces are attempting to reach the administrative border of the Kherson region.
In the Donetsk and Tavria directions, the Russian occupiers have intensified offensive operations along the entire line of contact. The main efforts of the enemy are focused on breaking through the defense of Ukrainian troops in Luhansk and Donetsk Oblasts, as well as establishing full control over the city of Mariupol.
Ukrainian troops say they are ready to counter a full-scale Russian offensive, with the country's defense ministry publishing footage of soldiers defending their positions in the government-controlled areas of Donetsk. Recently, the Kremlin has declared the capture of the Donbass region was the main goal of the war, after failing to secure Kiev.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has told Indian media that Moscow is not targeting civilians during its invasion of Ukraine, despite growing evidence of human atrocities. As countries impose more sanctions on Russia over the war, an increasingly isolated Moscow is strengthening its relationships across Asia. In the past few weeks, Lavrov has travelled to India and China. Well, our Euronews correspondent Galina Polinskaya joins me now. Hi, Galina. What else did Mr. Lavrov have to say in this press conference?
Hello, Charlotte. Well, Lavrov was asked if Russia was going to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and he said that Russia is going to use only conventional weapons at this stage. He said that the West played the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, against Russia so that the Minsk agreements would never be applied. He also said that it was impossible to seriously discuss Mr. Zelensky's proposals and accused him of constantly changing his mind. He mentioned the agreements that Ukraine gave to Russia in Istanbul, written on the paper, and said that they have been certainly changed. He denied the accusations of war crimes and said that it was the Ukrainian forces that were using civilians as human shield.
Well, this partnership building between Russia and India comes as everyday Russians start to feel the pinch of these sanctions imposed by the West. Do we know if their stance has changed on this war almost 2 months in?
Well, actually, a Kommersant newspaper has published a recent poll, and it still shows that the majority of Russians supports Vladimir Putin in his decision. But the question was, would you do something if you could have changed the past? So most of the people said no, and the tendency is that the level of support does not change either way. But the real question, what do Russians really think, is not answered. I don't think that anyone really knows what to say independent. So sociologists say that what people are telling when they are answering the posters is what they are ready to say in public, and that they are very confused and sometimes scared and sometimes just remember what they have heard on the state TV. What is important, and the sociologists underline that, is that both sides, those who support and those who are against, feel very, very confused and scared. And this is, I think, the truth about what Russians feel at this point.
US President Joe Biden is to spearhead a video conference today with G7 leaders to discuss the latest developments in Ukraine. In a house full of leaders, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen are also expected to be on the call. Top of the agenda for the virtual meeting will be the sending of heavy artillery such as tanks and jets. something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has consistently called for from Western leaders. Such a debate is already heating up in Germany, with Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz coming under fire both domestically and internationally over his reluctance to commit Germany to sending more artillery. The meeting arrives at a pivotal moment in Russia's assault on Ukraine, as the Kremlin begins a large-scale offensive on Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. According to the White House, there are no plans for Biden to visit Kiev, which may explain today's meeting being virtual. Instead, Washington is open to sending a top US official, such as Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
While Ukraine continually asks the West for military support, around 100 Porsche-designed Leopard 1 tanks, 60 M113 mortar carriers, as well as Bridge and Pioneer tanks are being stored up in halls and tents in Flensburg, in the state of Schleswig-Holstein, in Germany. They are all currently withdrawn from service, but would still be more than a useful addition to Ukraine's defence forces.
This is the Chancellery's fault. Olaf Scholz is stepping on the brake and is thus putting a huge responsibility upon himself. He's not helping Ukraine in this matter, and it would be easy for him to do so.
Olaf Scholz is coming under increasing pressure both from within and outside of Germany to authorise the delivery of heavy artillery in order to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia. Coalition partners accuse him of failing to live up to the promises he made in February, which was to relax Germany's restrictive stance on exporting weapons to conflict zones.
The Chancellor has said that he wants to modernize the military, but support Ukraine at the same time. This needs to be implemented. Consequently, this cannot take forever within the administration, because the war is continuing and we have to move more quickly.
But cabinet members feel their policy is in line with their current NATO partners.
So far, there are two countries who've delivered armed vehicles of Russian origin, that is Poland and Czech Republic. All other NATO members have not done that. Should there be a policy shift, it has to be done jointly.
But critics of Scholz say he is deliberating on a decision in an effort to appease those within his party who are still hoping for a diplomatic solution with the Kremlin.
Ukraine's security service has released a video message from imprisoned pro-Russian politician Viktor Medvedchuk. In the footage, he calls on Presidents Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky to swap him for defenders and residents of Mariupol. Medvedchuk's wife, Oksana Marchenko, also asked the Russian president to assist in her husband's exchange. Russian press secretary Dmitry Peskov replied that if there was any reaction from Vladimir Putin, then authorities would report on it. Meanwhile, Russian television released a video in which captured British soldiers Sean Pinner, seen here, and Aidan Eslin appealed to Prime Minister Boris Johnson for help. They asked to be exchanged for Viktor Medvedchuk. According to the Ukrainian Special Services, Medvedchuk, who was put on the international wanted list, tried to escape abroad. On April 12th, the Ukrainian authorities announced his arrest. Later online, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky offered to exchange the Moscow supporter for captured Ukrainian soldiers. Should this swap happen, it wouldn't be the first during this war. 3 weeks ago, Ukrainian and Russian forces conducted their first soldier-for-soldier exchange since Putin invaded Ukraine.
Israel says it fired a rocket into the Gaza Strip for the first time in months on Monday, in retaliation after Palestinian militants fired their own rocket. The airstrike standoff follows escalations of clashes at a sensitive holy site in Jerusalem, a series of deadly attacks inside Israel, and military raids across the occupied West Bank. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday night declared a national state of emergency after the worst floods in recorded history in the KwaZulu-Natal state. The president announced a three-pronged approach in how the government intends to deal with the disaster, focusing on immediate relief, recovery and rebuilding. Authorities have reported 443 deaths from the flooding so far.
You can stay up to date on these stories and more on our website at euronews.com.
Emmanuel Macron, Marine Le Pen, who will lead France for the next 5 years. Continuing coverage on Euronews and euronews.com.
Oh, how about a spark of inspiration? Yeah! Try that on for size. Level up in Forge of Empires. Play now for free at foe.tv or download the app.
Tonight has been very tough. I myself is now in the shelter. People say, look, I don't know what day is it today. Is it Monday, Sunday? But I do know that this is day 5. This is the feeling. This is the new reality that people all over Ukraine are living.
The heart of Ukraine is bleeding. On February 24th, Russia launched an all-out war on the country.
What are we fighting for? What did our soldiers die for?
The horror is just beginning.
People are really bracing for the worst now.
I saw the rage of people in shock.
We are angry, we are scared.
Whose lives were torn apart.
Our life in past destroyed.
I witnessed the pain of those forced to leave everything behind.
I'm saving my child. I can't stay here with this danger.
Euronews Witness on Euronews and euronews.com.
Follow the latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Live coverage from the key places. Unfiltered, unbiased, fact-based journalism. Continuing coverage on Euronews and euronews.com.
Hello and welcome back. A reminder of our top story. The Russian offensive to take control of the Donbass region has begun as Vladimir Putin moves to the second phase of his invasion of Ukraine. But Kiev says its forces will never give up. China has reported 7 more deaths from COVID-19 a day after confirming its first fatalities from its current wave. There are concerns its stringent zero-COVID policy could put the country's economy, as well as the global supply chain, at risk. A top Huawei executive warns this could trigger massive losses for the tech industry, and tensions are rising. Well, to break this down for us is Chief Economist Alicia Garcia-Arrero from corporate banking company Natixis. Thanks for joining us from Hong Kong, Alicia. We know Shanghai has been in lockdown for almost a month now. What disruptions are we seeing on the ground?
Well, there are, of course, consumer-related disruptions. So anything that is services, restoration, cinemas, all of that is gone. And we are seeing that in the data already. Look at retail sales, they're -3, restaurants -18. I mean, it's just very bad. But what matters for global value chains is, of course, manufacturing. And we already had quite poor PMI data on manufacturing. Now we need to really see whether China is going to see a massive disruption in exports. We've not yet seen that, only imports so far. And the question is, will we see disruptions in exports in April? That would be really a worrisome trend for inflation in the world.
Well, speaking of that, many countries here in Europe have adopted a live with COVID policy to try and revive the economy. What could happen to China's economy if another city is plunged into lockdown?
Well, we have more cities than Shanghai already, but the question is, will we have major cities like Guangdong or, major manufacturing centers? I think China is trying very hard to avoid that through mass testing and other means. But we can't really guarantee that there will be no new lockdowns because the policy of dynamic zero COVID is still in place. What China can do in terms of policies is, of course, to ease liquidity, and we are seeing that. So the PBOC, People's Bank of China, cut the reserve requirement ratio. It's also basically transferring profits to the Ministry of Finance, which is exactly the same as freeing more liquidity. And the Ministry of Finance has embarked in a big infrastructure plan. But the problem is, and this is different from Europe, that China doesn't really have an easy way to provide subsidies to households or SMEs. So the impact on the economy, and especially on consumption and unemployment through SMEs, might be very large. And I don't think it's going to be easy to avoid it.
Boris Johnson faces Parliament later today for the first time after being fined for attending lockdown parties. Vincent McAviney in London outlines what is in store for the British Prime Minister.
It's been a week since Boris Johnson became the first Prime Minister in British history to be found to have broken the law by the police whilst in office over a party in June 2020 for his birthday, which breached the lockdown rules that he himself had imposed on the public. There has been huge anger over this, of course, but he hasn't yet had to face politicians because Parliament has been in its Easter recess. That changes today. He's set to give an address in which he will likely repeat the apologies that he made last week on camera, but also he's going to try and divert attention, talking about his actions in Ukraine, travelling to meet President Zelensky, promising more weapons, and say that there are more pressing issues at play now compared to partygate. Now, some of his MPs are happy to go on board with that, but the opposition parties are all pretty livid. Now, they intend to either today or tomorrow try to bring a vote of censure on the Prime Minister for misleading Parliament, and his own MPs are having a meeting with him on Tuesday evening, what's being dubbed a Clear the Air session, in which he's going to try to build back support and build confidence in himself once again. The problem looming over all of this, though, is that the Prime Minister could face another fine. We know that the Met are planning to give out more fines for the investigations into the other events which took place, and so that threat is constantly looming as well. It could be a drip, which the Prime Minister cannot predict. He'll have to face Sir Keir Starmer at PMQs tomorrow, before then somewhat escaping the heat by going to India for a prime ministerial visit. Vincent McAviney, Euronews, London.
Welcome to theCUBE. Misinformation often spreads online during times of crisis and war. but it can also circulate during election campaigns when people are hungry for information and emotions are high. And often it is presidential candidates who can find themselves at the centre of false claims. So far, pro-Russian accounts online have seemingly focused their attention on the Ukraine war. But now they may also be turning their heads to the upcoming second round of voting in France's presidential election. A number of pro-Russian accounts on Telegram have been sharing this false claim, and it's also appeared on Twitter. It falsely claims that Emmanuel Macron said that sanctions on Russia could result in an influx of 60 million refugees in the next 20 years. You can see that a BBC News logo was also added to one such tweet. But this claim is false. There is no such BBC report, and Macron has not been recorded as saying anything like this. What he has said in the past is that he wants European sanctions on Russia to go further and include Russia's energy sector. He also says that France should be prepared to welcome around 100,000 Ukrainian refugees given the war in their country. But he did not make any reference to up to 60 million refugees due to Russia sanctions. So that claim is false, and it's perhaps not surprising given that Macron's rival, Marine Le Pen, is the preferred presidential candidate of the Kremlin, given her previous close relationship with Moscow and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Le Pen's stance has somewhat hardened, but we're still seeing election misinformation continuing to spread, now focusing on those two candidates. And it's also worth noting that Macron himself has said that election misinformation in countries like France is a serious threat to democracy.
If you want growth to be higher, please educate girls and empower women. Those were the words of the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva during a conversation with activist Malala Yousafzai on girls' education and gender equality.
We have calculated that if women have the same access to labor market as men, in the United States, GDP would be 5% higher, in Japan, 9% higher, in India, 27% higher, in Egypt, 34% higher. So you want to have prosperity, make sure that women can contribute to their communities, to their societies. Be higher.
Activist Malala urged developed nations to continue and increase financing for education, focusing on girls.
The world is facing a girls' education crisis. There are 130 million girls out of school, and this is a figure that comes from before the pandemic. Now there are millions of more girls at risk of losing education because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also climate change and conflicts.
Afghan women are some of those affected by a ban on girls' education after the Taliban swept back to power last August. Since then, they have taken to the streets demanding the right to education.
Good morning. How the children in Oklahoma City and indeed the children throughout America must be reacting to a horror of this magnitude.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget you can follow us on social media and stay up to date on these stories and more at euronews.com.